Jason, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much, Rich. Glad to be here.
Now, we're going to have a very vulnerable conversation today, which I love, particularly having the opportunity to talk to other men who've been through a bit of a journey of their own and have gotten to a place where they feel comfortable sharing more details of that journey, because there are so many of us who are walking around with different conditions, different stuff going on in our lives. And some of it we may know about, some of it we may not know about because it's much deeper than the surface. So before we get into all that, tell me what mental wealth means to you.
I love this because mental wealth to me is about the mental assets that we have to help us experience joy and happiness, and also to help us get through life's challenges. And when I talk about mental assets, these are the tools, the resources, the experiences that we have that help us go through life. And some of us are innately born with some of these mental assets, but the vast majority of us learn it through the process of living life. And for me, that is what mental wealth is.
I love that. I love that. Now, we'll talk about mental health, wealth, well-being, all that. But one thing I've noticed, and actually something that's pretty cool, I came across the personal finance community by going to your Road to Wellness event in Chicago back in, I think, 2016, 17, 2016. So even then you were traveling around the country, but I've noticed that you are a traveling ass traveler. You were in Africa not too long ago. Then you came back to the States and traveled some more, and now you're just getting a chance to take a bit of a break. Where does all of this traveling come from for you?
You know what? I think I'm going to go back a little bit here because I've always enjoyed traveling. And when I grew up in Elizabeth, New Jersey, and I never thought I would ever leave the city. But I did have experiences of going to California, Nevada, and Florida with my family, my folks, all made provided by my aunt who had money. And I think as a kid, I always wanted to be able to see the world. And I kind of live in this fantasy of going out into space or going out to different continents. And so that has been ingrained. But through the process that I've gone through, I realized I am a traveler because of the fact that for some point I was running away. And I thought that by going to different places, I could get away from whatever situation I was going through. And for a point that worked. And eventually I realized that's just part of the process of my personal healing. But for me, traveling just gives me different experiences, helps me meet new people, have different conversations. And I think that is so important and essential. And so when people see me traveling all around the world, traveling all across the US, the joy that I have are the experiences in these places and the conversations I have with people. Because for me, it isn't just about seeing a location or checking it off in the bucket list. It's about how am I growing? What am I learning about myself and about other people that helps me to become a better person? And so that's why I am a traveler. And by travel, as you mentioned, 40 plus countries, 49 states in the US. I love it. I love it.
What's the one state you haven't been to yet?
North Dakota. And
I thought for sure it was going to be Alaska.
no, I've been to Alaska.
Yeah, I thought for sure. Oh,
I've been to Alaska
North
because
Dakota.
I wanted to chase the midnight sun. So I thought it would be awesome to be able to see the day never turning into night. And that was truly an experience. And that just made me realize that there are certain parts of this world that the sun is up, during the summer solstice for 24 hours. I mean, just how mind blowing is that? And for my brain to process that the sun has been up for 24 hours just totally shifted my mindset and my thinking. And that's why I love doing these things. It's because it's challenging the norms and the process that my brain has been accustomed to. So yeah, I definitely recommend, if you're going to Alaska, try to chase the midnight sun during the summer solstice.
Now, what's kept you away from North Dakota? I got to ask, because you went to South Dakota, so North Dakota was there, and you went to the states around it. So what's kept you away from North Dakota so far?
You know what? I think it was challenges in trying to get an event And not knowing anyone from North Dakota, I think that's probably the biggest challenge. And it wasn't intentional. I wasn't like, oh, I'm going to save North Dakota. It was just there was nothing there, unfortunately, when I was planning out my road trips. And then I realized that North Dakota, for many people, is the last state they visit. And actually, they take pride. And people join the 50 state club by making North Dakota the last state that they visit. And so that will be the last state that I visit. And that just happens to be by chance and not planned. And so now I'm going to try to figure out what's in North Dakota and bring in the conversation on wellness and happiness to that state.
Now, I guess there's a good chance you might end up on a military base, so you might want to get your government clearance and all that stuff in order because I think that's part of what's there and parks and maybe yeah. So I'll be excited to hear about what the journey does turn out to be when you finally do make that trip to North Dakota because now I'm invested in this whole experience. But there's also a money aspect to traveling that I wanna talk about because you've been to all of these countries and done all of this stuff, and for some people, that might not sound accessible, like, maybe they're just starting their career, maybe they're just not in a position financially to be able to do that. So talk a little bit about what's gotten you to the place where you could afford to have these experiences in your life?
I think that has just a lot to do with prioritizing. And I tend to share that money, we need to direct where our money goes. And so, I mean, there's that B word, right? Or the S word, budgeting and the spending plan. And a lot of that just has to do with how are you directing your money to the aspects of your life that you want to have or live or experience. And what I've learned through my own personal experience was I was spending money on things that didn't really add value to my life. And that was before I had like the great awakening to realize that travel was a very important part of the life I wanted to live because of the process that I wanted to go through as a human being. And for many people, I think we are programmed to just buy, make purchases. And what that does is that we're thinking that by buying XYZ, the latest product, the latest gadget, what have you, that we're building or creating the life of our dreams. And what tends to happen is that we look at our bank account and go, wow, I have no money to travel. And I've learned that the vast majority of us, even with a few dollars, we can have experiences. And it doesn't mean you have to travel across state borders or fly across the ocean. You can explore the city next door, and that is traveling. You can explore the next state, and that doesn't cost a lot of money. And of course, you mentioned that not everyone's in the same financial situation. I was there. I worked at Newark Airport. I was a bartender. I served drinks. I cleaned toilets, and I was making like $8 an hour. And I did find ways to explore different locations. And I think it's important for people, if travel is important, and I think it is essential and vital for growth. I definitely think it's prioritizing and figuring out where we can take some money out of some expenses that don't have value to our life and place it into that travel bucket.
Mm. And you talked about this a little bit, but I was curious about what you've had to sacrifice. And maybe sacrifice isn't the right word. Maybe that's not the right word for it. But when you make a decision for one thing, like for example, me running track and field, me focusing on track last year meant that I could not spend as much time on the podcast. I won't say that I could not. I chose not to spend as much time on the podcast because one, I was healing, but two, I needed to be spending time training and getting ready for a championship meet. So I had to put something on the back burner. I'm curious for you, what are some of those things that you've had to put on the back burner or that you sacrificed, for lack of a better word, so that you could prioritize travel?
Yeah, so one of that was, so I haven't traveled, I think, understandably, for the last like 2.5 years because of the pandemic and everything that's going on. And what I did was I focused on really caretaking for my parents. My parents have pre-existing conditions. And so that to me was essential to kind of get them doing well in the world that no one understood was unraveling and unfolding right before our eyes. And so for me, it was a matter of kind of leaving behind the life that I created. And part of that was the travel aspect of it. Part of that was moving to Florida and being quarantined with my folks. And that's another story of being around them and all the emotions that unravel being with your folks as an older son. And so for me, I think I prioritize travel, and I've always allocated resources to make it happen. But then there are situations where there are things that are much more important, and that was kind of dealing with the situation and environment that was unfolding, and then going through the process of healing. So one of the key things too, when I wasn't traveling in 2020 and the world was in this mental chaotic situation, and we were all stuck at home, I had travel money budget and that I wasn't using. And so for the first time, I had the time to follow a goal of mine that I'd had for over a decade, which was to become a certified yoga teacher. And
Wow.
yoga is a practice that I've been doing for over a decade. And I've always wanted to go through the training program, but for some reason, I always had an excuse. Like I was too busy or I was working on a different project. And although I had a yoga practice, I wanted to dive deeper into the actual philosophy of yoga. And I didn't realize how much I was missing by not going through a yoga teacher training. And it wasn't about getting into poses or twisting my body in very unconventional and very awe inspiring ways. It was the mental challenges that I was going through. And so after a decade, I became a certified yoga teacher. I did everything online because it was the first time the Yoga Aligned certification body allowed yoga teacher training to take place in an online environment. And so I took advantage of the situation and I said, okay, I need to do something because I feel like I can't control anything in my life, but this is one thing I can control. And I ended up with a online community of others all around the world who were getting deeper into their yoga practice and the conversations that we were having, and me fully understanding that about the power of breath, about the movement. It has nothing to do with really like physical strength. It all has to do with like just being present and alive within our body. And when we're present and alive in our body, we experience the world differently. And so when I look at my $3,000 budget to go traveling for that year, it was used to pay for that online teacher training program for the certification, and it was worth every single penny. And that for me, it's like it's transformed the way I think, the way I feel, and the way I go about pretty much everything. And I wouldn't have thought that an online yoga teacher certification program would work wonders.
It's crazy to hear that because it says so much about you. It also says that you're an achiever. But you said something in there, not but, and you said something in there that I'm curious about. And what does being present and alive in your body mean? Because I was just recently talking about what it means to be in your body to somebody, and I had a whole thing with being in the moment, like which is the same thing, I guess, as being present in some ways, being in the now. Because I find that a lot of times when we're worrying and when we're struggling, we're not in the present. We're in the past or we're in the future. So I would love to hear from you how you think about what it means to be present and alive in your body.
One thing that I learned was being present really means that we're kind of taking in exactly, I mean, everything that's happening all around us. So we're not making any judgments. We're not thinking about the past. We're not thinking about the future. And so one of the things I like to share with people is that when we're thinking about the past and we're thinking about all the negativity and the negative things that has transpired in the past, that's where depression takes place. And when we're thinking about the future and the uncertainty, and we're so focused on what's going to happen next, that's where anxiety lives and fosters.
Love the way you phrase that.
And so for me, like being present is just, yeah, it's being in this moment, it's being in this conversation, it's being in this space, for all its goodness, for all its ugliness, for all its opportunities and all its challenges. It's really assessing everything all at once. And just to give you an idea, when I travel, and we talked about that, is that the pictures and the videos and the stories that I post are often days later from that actual experience. And my close friends know this because I want to be in the moment, but I also understand the importance of sharing these moments because it may inspire other people. But I don't want to lose the opportunity to fully experience it myself by trying to show off or show up, and that takes me away from being present. And I think being present and alive and being in our body is just truly just kind of feeling. And it really is being attuned to our emotions, being attuned to what's happening, but also this is all has to do with emotional intelligence and not being overrun by them. It's assessing, it's managing, it's processing the environment in a way to say, okay, I'm going through this, but I'm not this. It's just a response to whatever is taking place. And that for me is what being present, being alive, and being in my body means.
I'm so glad I asked you that, and I hope the people who are listening or watching this on YouTube are getting takeaways from this, because that's like, to me, like that is part of what the mental wealth is. You know, that ability to be present and enjoy what's happening in the moment, and to even be able to say, I don't need to rush and get this online, because I think in some ways, folks who do what we do, we're content creators, and so there is like that pressure of we, especially there's algorithms. We need to be consistent. We need to be consistent. But it sounds like you're okay in your approach with saying I prioritize, and or actually maybe you have enough content that you just always have stuff that's just like going up like that. But to me, it sounds like you also don't. You're also not emphasizing putting it out to the world over like what the experience is intended to do, which is to be a learning opportunity or enjoyment opportunity for you.
Yeah, I think, and this is the thing with social media. I think it's great. It's a double edged sword. It's great because we can connect, and we can connect with some really like minded people. We can help others by sharing the things that we create. But also, we are not meant to constantly create 24/7. There needs to be a period of relaxation, a period for us to kind of reassess, reflect on the things that we've created. And most of the things that we create are often inspired by our experiences. And you can't have true experiences when you're always out pushing content and always out trying to show people what you're doing. And that's why you probably see this everywhere. Content creators are exhausted. Content creators are taking a step back and they're saying, I need a mental health break. And what I'm saying to others is that if you're a content creator, if you're an entrepreneur, if you're working in the corporate world and you happen to be an overachiever like myself, you don't have to show your achievements right as they happen. You can allow yourself some time, some space and grace to kind of enjoy the moment for yourself, for your close loved ones. And eventually at your own time, you can share it, because at that moment, the people watching and viewing those experiences that you've just shared are experiencing in real time. And now you have the ability of reflection and assessing to be able to share it in a different way. And so that's kind of one of the key things that I've learned, because Rich, I was exhausted from oversharing in the last few years. And part of my story was that I was, and I like to tell people now, that I am a high functioning mess. And people, I think, associate that when you are an overachiever, when you are functioning in a way that people assume there's nothing wrong or there's nothing else going in your life, that you have it easier than so and so, because yeah, you don't have the mental challenges, you don't have the family issues, you don't have the financial or environmental situations. And then for me, I think part of that was I wanted to share how life can be lived. And a lot of that had to do with me just kind of getting through my own life. And a way of just showing the highlights was a way for me to say, okay, through all this crap that I'm going through, it's that there are things that I'm achieving. But if all we do is achieve and all we do is share those achievements, we actually never get to feel the sense of fulfillment. And so for me, I have been so focused on being fulfilled in the things that I do. And that goes back to being present in the moment. That also goes back into the ability to share, because I love sharing with others and inspiring them and allowing them to know there's an alternative way of living. And but part of that is really the balancing act of setting goals to feel that achievement, because they it does feel great, but also truly feeling the sense of fulfillment. And that fulfillment for me is experienced best through the journey, being present through the journey. Because when I grew up believing that there was that, path to success and happiness and joy. Go to college, graduate, get a job, buy a house, get married, right? There are all these different milestones we have to reach in order for us to be successful and happy. And so when I was reaching these milestones, I was climbing up the corporate ladder. I made six figures. I lived in Palo Alto. I had that beautiful car and I was going on vacations. I started asking older people and my family and friends, going, so when do I get to be happy? And what I was getting was this response that, oh, you're so entitled. You think you're going to be happy. But I'm like, wait a minute. You told me if I follow this path to success and happiness, I'm going to feel this overwhelming joy. And now you're telling me, well, no, you're entitled to think that's even possible. And so that was part of my processing and reasoning to go, there must be another way. And that's when I was offered the successor CEO route, I decided to quit instead, and I found myself backpacking around the world. And so kind of jump forward a few years later, I became a writer. I started Phroogal.com, and I started in the money space where we met. Well, I realized that climbing up the corporate ladder and getting all the income goals, well, I learned that climbing that entrepreneurial ladder and getting all the revenue goals are the same thing. It led me to more exhaustion. It led me to questioning if I was making the right decisions, because I think being a high achiever, being someone who wants to constantly do things and set goals and achieve them, it's that we can run ourselves to the ground. We do all the mental gymnastics to say what we're feeling and what we're going through is okay, because the prize at the end of the suffering is well worth it. And so, to let you know, and it's probably one of the first things that might surprise you, is that the reason why I disappeared after the success of my first book, You Only Live Once, and me traveling and speaking for a living, was that I was mentally exhausted once again. And I was questioning my life choices. I realized I was chasing influence over affluence. I was realizing I was trying to show up for people before I was showing up for myself. And when we start doing all the mental gymnastics to say, okay, everything is okay, I'm doing fine, and trying to not deal with the situation, well, our mental gymnastics exhausts our physical body, and that mental stress starts manifesting itself physically. And when it starts manifesting itself physically, well, guess what? You can't ignore it. You know that you can't get out of bed. You know you don't want to answer that phone because you don't have the energy. And when I was talking to family and friends, I would fall asleep. I mean, how does that happen? Like, we're having a conversation and I couldn't keep myself awake because my body was just physically exhausted from all the mental and emotional drainage. And for me, I had to really sit down and ask myself, like, I ran this race twice. I need to make a change. And part of that was realizing I don't need to be public all the time. Part of that was protecting my time, protecting my space, and really focusing on how can I be a better version of myself from the previous day. And that is about being present. And that is, yes, I do have goals, but I allow for serendipity to make these goals happen, and for surprises to come along and to say, oh wow, there is a better way of doing it, or you know what, I no longer want it.
Yeah. Oh, you said so much. So I'm going to try to tackle a few things in response to that. One, I told y'all we were going to be having a vulnerable conversation today, and then there's still some way to go. A lot of what you said about being present and enjoying it and stopping to appreciate, that's also how I feel right now about going the shift from reflecting on 2022 to jumping into now I got to post goals and I got to tell people like what I'm doing. So it was like the last week of December was about the highlight reels and reflecting. And then people are quickly jumping into, I got to rush into 2023. And I'm thinking to myself, there's 365 days in a year. And we probably need a bit more than a couple of days to be able to reflect and truly kind of learn and grow from what's happened in the year past. And I'd say, yes, we should also be doing that throughout. But I think at the end of the year, we go from, all right, time to show the highlight reel to like going jumping right into the next thing. All right, so now I put these goals out there. So now I gotta, now I gotta be running toward these goals because I put that out there. So just while you were talking, I was thinking about that one. And I was also thinking about the arrival fallacy, which basically says that you will arrive or you will eventually get to a place where you'll have everything that you need and you won't have to hustle anymore. But the truth is, when you achieve that next thing, you're looking to what's next. And so you never really feel like you're arriving because you're constantly chasing. I'm just really glad you said everything that you did there.
Yeah, and just to kind of reemphasize what you said in terms of that arrival fallacy, that's what we're taught. We're taught we will be happy once we arrive at X, and X can be anything. And so once you arrive, you realize, okay, well, I am happy, but I'm not engulfed in happiness and joy. And you start questioning things. So now we're programmed to just kind of set goals. So once we arrive and we're not engulfed in that pure joy and happiness, we set another goal thinking, okay, maybe happiness is in that second part of this journey or that milestone. And so we never arrive. And one of the key things I like telling people is that when you're looking at joy and happiness, both of these things are emotions, and emotions are experienced at the present moment. And so you're never just going to feel it once you arrive at a specific goal or achievement. It really is through the journey. And that's the power of being present in the journey. Again, the good and the bad, because when I look at my process, when I looked at the things that I've gone through, it has been ups and downs, twists and turns, and there are really painful moments and things that I really questioned whether or not I was making the right decisions. And ultimately, when you zoom out, I go, things do work out when we're moving forward. And moving forward doesn't mean towards the goals that we set. It really is just means moving forward in life and going and learning and growing. And so I think that's important when we're talking about or we're talking to high achievers and high performers that we do like. And I think it's important for us. I think that's one of the key things, right? I'm not telling people don't set goals, don't set achievements, because I think it's important for us because that's part of our wiring, but also understanding that we need to enjoy the moment. We need to enjoy the journey as much as the end point. And when you talk about the highlight reel, I personally love highlight reels. And do you know why? It has a lot to do with understanding what you've gone through and focusing your mind on the positive results of your efforts. And so, yes, it's a bit of, hey, look at the life that I lived this past year. But I think the exercise, if you're mindful and if you're going through this process of understanding who you are and who you want to become, these highlight reels can be a tool to help you understand through all the pain, through all the barriers and challenges, that there are still things that you're accomplishing that makes you feel happy just by looking at those photos, by looking at these things. And that can propel you forward in your life's quest. And so with that, it also you mentioned it's like, well, yeah, we have the highlight, and all of a sudden we're running. And I just want to tell everyone, and I think you alluded to it, slow down. You can slow down. It's not a sprint. It really is a marathon to get to where we want to. Everything I've wanted and that I've worked hard for, and some way or fashion has come about, and not on my time, not on the deadlines that I've set, but eventually it does arrive in its own way. And I think that's because we're still learning and growing, and we think we want this goal this year, but we may not be ready for it. And so for me, People have asked me, it's like, oh, Jason, you've done so many amazing things for the personal finance community, for the wellness community, but you haven't blown up. Like, you're not everywhere as others that started with you. And I go, well, I think that was by design. I wasn't mentally and emotionally and physically and spiritually ready to be bombarded with requests from many more than the community that I currently have. And so I think about that stuff, and and that's why when I share my highlight reels, I always have thoughts about those experiences, about achieving, and not just, hey, this is the things that I've accomplished this year. It's sort of like, well, this is the process, the emotional journey, the spiritual journey that I went through, because it's a reminder for myself that, okay, there's still a lot of growth that I need to go through. And this year I have set goals, but I'm allowing, once again, for serendipity. I mean, these things can change because of the surprises and the different things that can open up.
I love the way you talked about essentially starting with you when it comes to even sharing these highlight reels, because I think sometimes a lot of us create these for other people. We're not creating them for us. I mean, we are, but ultimately we're creating them for other people so that we can get the like, and then so that we can ultimately feel good,
Yep.
versus creating it, reflecting on it, thinking about what you actually accomplished, and sharing that because you're proud, versus sharing that because you're waiting for the reaction to it. So that feels like a very critical distinction there.
It is. And I tell everyone, if you follow me on social media, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, I always share certain affirmations, certain thoughts, and motivational, inspirational quotes. And if you know me, you understand I share them for me. And it's a bit of a selfish act. And the reason being is that there are moments that I need a little boost. There are moments that I'm not feeling motivated, or I'm going through something. By me sharing something motivational, inspirational, it really is geared towards me. And so if you see photos of the sunrise or the sunsets, or inspirational quote, oh, he's going through something right now. And that is a process that I've learned, because, okay, one of the key things is that I can share some of the negative things and the challenges, and I do. But for me, it's a matter of, okay, well, I want to focus on some positive aspects of the situation, and that might just be as a simple reminder and a way for me to reflect. And so when you see me staring at a sunset photo, that's when you know, oh, Jason is thinking. He's thinking right now. He's reflecting. And again, it's not all negative. It's just a matter of me processing my emotions and allowing me to heal. And I think that's why these are tools. Social media, the ability to share, are tools to help us manage our emotions, to help us deal with our mental health. But also, again, it's that double-edged sword. And so I don't go and post to gain more followers. I don't go and post to get more likes. I go to be able to change at least one person. And if that one person happens to be me, I mean, that's a good thing, because it's one less person in this world that's suffering. And so I want people to understand that too. It's like, we have this idea as content creators, as influencers, as entrepreneurs, that we want to change the world, but the world can change by the one person that stares back at us every time we look at the mirror. And so that's why I've loved your journey. I'm loving your journey. I'm loving your podcast. I'm loving the things that you're sharing, the vulnerability, the challenges, the surprises, and the joys, because it's real. And I see a lot of reflection. I see a lot of empathy. I see a lot of like love, and I think we need more of that.
Ah, we so do, and I appreciate the kind words about my journey, especially because we're about to talk more about yours. So a lot of what you said, it requires you to have done some healing, and I'm at a phase where I've just gotten through a critical part of my healing journey, and so I'm able to look back at a lot of stuff. And what really struck me is that prior to recently, I had this feeling about my peer group, because so prior to this life of personal finance, now health and wellness, I was a blogger, writer, talked about dating and relationships back 2012, even before that. And there was a group of us who all started at the same time. And now a lot of those folks, most of those folks who I associated with, they're bestsellers and they're getting TV shows. They're on television. And for a while it was like, man, how did I fall so far behind? But now I'm at a place where I can look back and say, if those opportunities had come my way, then I wouldn't have been ready. Like, just with everything that I knew that was going on behind the scenes, I could say like, oh, I would have got it done, but yeah, I would have got it done, but to my detriment. I can tell you that right now because I just didn't have the insight that I have now. And when you're in it, sometimes you don't know that you're in it. And it's not till you're out of it that you can look back and be like, wow, okay, here's where I was. So I want to talk a little bit about your journey because it sounds like you had that point where you were able to detach from everything that was going on and to do some processing. And I've got to say, I've always admired your efforts from afar. I'm not big on commenting on social media myself, but I see what's happening. And I did notice that you had disappeared for a bit. And before you had disappeared, there was a point where I wondered, how is he doing all of this? This is incredible. And so, talk a little bit about what was actually going on behind the scenes and how you got to a place of healing. And even before healing, how you got to the root of what was actually going on, because I think that's something that a lot of us struggle with. In fact, not I think, I know that's something that a lot of us struggle with. We think we're getting to the root of it, but we're not. And so we find ourselves stuck in a cycle that we can't get out of.
Yeah. So to give some people more context of my journey is that finance was a big aspect of it. I lived in 17 different homes before I graduated college. My parents certainly didn't make enough, but they provided for the necessary things. And I think we didn't grow up with brand name clothes, the best next luxury items. And I think that has informed the way I am and the way I think about myself and how I compare myself to others. And so one way for me to heal was to become an overachiever. And I think being one of 5 kids, to stand up and to be seen by my parents as like, hey, look at all these things that I'm doing. And I didn't realize until just a couple years ago the emotional pain, the baggage, the trauma, the issues that I was dealing with trying to be seen and overcompensating, not being visible by achieving and believing that all the things that I'm achieving wasn't enough. So I need to set bigger and better goals. And that's kind of pretty nice, right? Because instead of being self-destructive, I was being productive. Well, that's what it looked like in the outside. I was a best-selling New York Times reviewed author. I was getting paid tens of thousands of dollars to speak for 1 hour. I was traveling around the country, around the world, and sharing my story of, again, how I became a financial mess to financial success, and talking about how financial knowledge has empowered me to make better financial decisions to get me to a point where I am today. And that is certainly true. That certainly has happened. But through the process of achieving these quote unquote amazing things that people saw on social media that they read about, I was actually dealing with a lot of pain, and pain I didn't know where it was coming from. And now I like to share with folks to give you a better idea is that I always imagined this little kid in the corner of a room, in this dark room, and just afraid. And then finally, a hand was reaching out to help this kid up. And that hand happened to be me, an older version of this kid that was afraid and crying and felt alone in this corner. And that had a lot to do with the process that I went through. And one, I needed to heal from my financial trauma, believing that because we didn't have the financial means, I was less than. So when I achieved financial success and I achieved the income goals, I was faced with the reality of having to deal with other aspects of my life, and I wasn't ready. And so when we met and you attended that event in 2016, I was at the height of my professional, entrepreneurial, and income success. I was making more money. I was more visible than ever. But behind closed doors, I was laying in bed going, I feel alone. I'm unsure. And if I have all these things I said I wanted, what is this part that's missing? And I didn't necessarily know what that was. So, as a high achiever, what do high achievers do? we dive deeper into stuff. We keep going and building on what we know, and so that's what I did, and so that's why you saw me everywhere. And you're if you're wondering and you ask that question, like, how am I doing it? Well, I just did it because we're wired that way, and I was using kind of all these emotions that I was going through as fuel. But eventually we get exhausted. I just say, like, the hustle culture, I fell into it. Gears that grind for too long get worn out and then thrown out. And eventually I got thrown out because I was worn out from the emotional and mental things. And so I needed to take a break. And part of that break was kind of a moment of having to help my folks. My mother was diagnosed with Parkinson's and she had to retire early, and dealing with that medical issue. Also, my own medical. I was diagnosed with, and it's not a medical diagnosis, adrenal fatigue, because my body was out of whack from all the things that I was doing, and again, falling asleep in odd hours of the day. And so I was manifesting all these physical illnesses, dealing with my parents' financial situations, and also dealing with the growth of a business that I could no longer manage. And so there are all these things that was adding up, and eventually I needed, like, I had a hand to God moment and going, I have to take a step back. And then so I decided what was best for me was to kind of focus on what I could control. And that had a lot to do with like dealing with where I am at that present moment, which was dealing with my mental and emotional well-being. And so that's where you saw me disappear. And at the same time, I was still working. I was still doing it, and I was enjoying it. But also I was healing and uncovering different aspects of my childhood. So there's one book that helped me. And because I used to say, and I used to ask myself, like, who am I? And what's wrong with me? And I read a book by Oprah, and it was What Happened to You? And so instead of asking, like, what is wrong with me? Who am I started asking, what happened to me? And then by asking that question, I realized there were all these different situations in my childhood, in the past, that has led me to where I am today. Some of it good, some of it bad. And certainly we could probably spend another hour talking about the crazy things that I've done in life. And there's certainly a lot of them, and how it led me to, one, I stopped drinking. Two, I meditate every single day. Three, it's like there are all these different processes, and there's a reason why I do the things that I do. And again, that's part of my healing process, part of my journey, to allow me to continue to serve my purpose, to allow me to continue to be a better person in this path.
Man, you gave me a new perspective on grinding, and like the idea of tools getting ground down and worn out and being thrown away. Like, grinding was the thing for so long, but if you just keep grinding, like, I'm surprised people didn't think about that more. Like, if you just keep grinding, when you grind your teeth, anything else that you grind, even coffee beans for that matter, is ultimately getting worn down. So I love that. Now, you also mentioned the healing, and I've learned from my own journey that healing is hard as hell.
Yeah.
And I also found that healing wasn't what I thought it was going to be. So talk about what healing looked like for you.
Yeah, healing is a lifelong process. I think there are certain things that we go through in life that we've forgotten, and things that happen to us when we're kids that we don't even remember, because our mind has, again, done the mental gymnastics to protect us, to allow us to keep moving forward. And so for me, healing was really facing these emotions as they arise from memories that started surfacing. And so it is a lifelong process. And I want people to understand that just because we deal with a situation doesn't necessarily mean, okay, we're fully healed from it, because there are different aspects. And that's the thing that I learned. We are multidimensional. We are multifaceted. We are multi-layered individuals. And we are these things because the traumas, the issues, the situations we've grown in are complex as well. So for me, talking about the relationship I had with my father has affected me in a specific way. But that's also multi-layered, because he's grown up in a situation that affected him, that affected his relationship with me. And so understanding that context, that I may be in a journey of healing, and the person that I need to be quote unquote healed from may not be. And I can't wait or rely on someone to heal before I heal myself. And that was the thing that surprised me the most, that I can forgive those who've hurt me before they ask for forgiveness, that I can heal before I'm fully ready to understand the complexity of the things that have injured me. And that has strengthened me in a way that has allowed me to kind of continue to pursue this growth, this healing process.
Ah, I love that so much, particularly that you stress that it's lifelong because I've started saying healing is forever.
Mm.
And I truly believe that even though I just conquered a chapter, that's why I say a chapter. I haven't said that I'm done. I said I just passed a chapter, and even part of what was surprising from that was that I got what I needed, but not what I wanted from doing what I needed to do, which was to have a conversation with my mom. And that conversation didn't go the way that I wanted, but it showed me that I needed to radically accept her as she is today, and that she's someone who's not going to come back and ask for forgiveness because she's had her, again, like you said about your dad, like she's had her own trauma, and she's lived in her head most of her life, and she's now 75 years old. And so now I feel like it's gone from the child version of me like fighting to be seen to like the adult version of me seeing that this is my mom at 75 years old. She doesn't have infinite years left. How can I improve our relationship going forward? And
I
so I
love that.
didn't walk away from it's yeah, so it's like I didn't walk away from the conversation feeling good because I realized going into it that I still had this hope that she was going to see me and that she was going to change, and that didn't happen, but it was what I needed because it turned out that was what was keeping me emotionally unavailable in so many other aspects of my life, that I had never told my mom like truly how I felt and didn't feel I could tell her how I felt because of the feelings that had to be stuffed down because of what was going on in the household growing up. Then there was also this fear of abandonment that was tied in because I didn't want to tell her how I felt, and then she was going to be hurt and disappointed, even though I still needed to tell her how I felt. But after having that conversation, I noticed that other conversations in my life got a lot easier. So I just everything like you're describing, it's wild to hear. And I also see why we're having this conversation now. And I'm glad we're having this conversation now because I can just relate so much, different context, but I can just relate so much to your journey.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. And I think it's so valuable for us to all understand that we all have a journey, we all have a history, and there are more things that bind us and more things that are common than separate us. And I think the work that you're doing, the shares that I'm doing myself, is allowing people to connect the dots and realize that healing is a process. Growth is a necessity in order for us to feel more joy and happiness. And growth is painful, right? Every time we experience growth, there's some pain through it. And so you sharing the pain of expressing the emotions with your mom has allowed you to heal in a specific way. And I did the exact same thing with my dad, and it didn't go the way I thought it would go. It actually went worse. I had him yell at me and tell me I had no trauma and I was making it up. And so, but then I realized, I can't change this individual. And what I want to do is change the memories. And so when people that know my story, that know my relationship, understand I've done the work to change the relationship with my folks. And that has a lot to do with gaining, kind of not gaining, but creating better memories. And so I said, okay, you are older, they are in their 70s. I'm like, I want to create better memories. So the memories that I share with them that I've created are purposeful. So that way I have these over some of the traumatic experiences. And so I think it's essential and important for us to understand that. And so one of the key things, like, I want to remind everyone, when you consider yourself high functioning, high achiever, and doing the things that make you look great on paper, that make you look great on social, is that take the time to take a step back, understand who you are and who you're becoming, and understand that you have the power to kind of start closing the doors or ending the chapters of specific parts of your life and moving on to the next piece of it, because there's just so much more than you can write, so many more stories that you can create, and that is just part of the process and the journey of healing.
Oh, I love that so much. Jason, thank you so much for coming on the podcast. Like, this has been it's such a refreshing conversation. And for those folks listening and watching, there's going to be more of that this year, because this is what so many of us need. We need to heal. We need to get to the root of what's going on with us, and we need to accept. I think that's a big part of it too. And when I say there's kind of going through the stages of grief and acceptance, and there's that, but there's also what my therapist called radical acceptance in the case of my mom, where flaws and all, like, you accept someone as who they are, or even accepting that certain situations where I made horrible decisions. Yes, I still acknowledge that, like, I made these bad decisions and I did this thing. And the state that I was in and with the things that I had not yet addressed, I can see why I did those things, and being able to, like, look at those things with a bit more compassion in the process. And I want people to be able to do that for themselves. I know you've got some good things going on, so tell the Mental Wealth Show family what you got going on, where they can find you, all that good stuff.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for having me on. Thank you all for listening to this amazing conversation. And so I want you to connect with me online on social media. If you love yoga, you love traveling, you love inspiration and motivation in all aspects of your well-being, you can find me on Instagram at Jason Vitug, or on Twitter, and as well as on Facebook. Just look for me with my name. The most amazing project that I'm currently working on is really spreading the word on the 8 dimensions of wellness. Again, I mentioned we are multifaceted, multidimensional beings, and there are 8 parts of you that comprises your mental, emotional, physical, spiritual, occupational, environmental, social, and financial well-being. So these are 8 distinct areas that we need to focus on. And I wrote a book that comes out in February 2023 that talks about the multidimensional approach to health, wealth, and financial freedom. And it's called Happy Money, Happy Life. And as you can tell from the title, it is all about joy and happiness, and utilizing money in a way that was unimaginable to help us with our mental and emotional well-being and all aspects, again, of our 8 wellness dimensions.
You are doing some universal work, or universal as in the universe. I can see that you're very clearly on your path, and I love what you're putting out into the world. And I'm really excited to see everything that you have planned for 2023 come to fruition. Now, as far as something that you're thinking about for your well-being this year that you're going to do differently from the past year, what's one thing that you're thinking about doing this year? Whether it could be drinking more water, it could be stretching more. What's something you're thinking about doing differently in 2023?
So, I've actually had a pretty good like process. So I meditate, I do yoga, I stretch, I drink lots of water. So I think I'm gonna try to cut out coffee. Uh, I love coffee. I love the taste of coffee. I have it once or twice a day. I'm not going to eliminate it, because I think I find joy and happiness in drinking that coffee in that moment. But that's probably something that I will curtail, and that has just a lot to do with more managing my physical energy and my mental focus, and challenging my mind and my body to stop relying on kind of caffeine or an external stimulant to get through a day.
Oh, that is a fantastic one. I mean, I'm gonna keep drinking these energy drinks for now, but hopefully, I'll be able to come off these monsters soon. But Jason, and once again, it's been fantastic to have you on the podcast. Appreciate your vulnerability, and yeah, I can't wait to have this out into the world so people can hear the goodness.
Thank you so much.